The China Report for Wednesday, February 20, 2013. Water pollution issues continue. A Chinese entrepreneur offered 200,000 yuan to any local environment agency official who can swim in a heavily polluted river for at least 20 minutes. The head of the Meiyuankang Eyeglass Limited Company in Hangzhou, China dared the Zhejiang environmental chief to swim in an unnamed river near Hangzhou. Jin said he used to swim in the river when he was a boy and his mother also washed his family's clothing there. 40% of China's rivers are seriously polluted, around 1,700 water pollution accidents taking place each year. China to take over key port in Pakistan. Pakistan and China have signed an agreement in Islamabad to hand over the Gwadar port to a Chinese company. Under the agreement, the Chinese company will fully assume the responsibility of Gwadar port. According to News International, the port will remain the property of Pakistan and the Chinese company will share the profit from it. The project is of significant strategic importance for China. Nearly 60% of China's crude oil is imported from the Gulf countries, which will increase dramatically in the next decade. Chinese military linked to cyber warfare. A U.S. company has accused a Chinese military intelligence unit in Shanghai of conducting a huge cyber espionage campaign against Western companies, in the most specific allegations that the People's Liberation Army sponsors hacking. The accusation follows a string of recent announcements by U.S. media groups that they had been hacked from China. The most recent spate of incidents is part of a rise in reports of cyber attacks over the past few years. China rejects status as world's biggest trader. China has a new status the Chinese government doesn't want. World's biggest trader. Trade data indicates China passed the United States last year in total imports and exports by a margin of $3.866 trillion to $3.822 trillion, that is about $44 billion, or just over 1% of China's total. Beijing wants to be a global leader but insists it still is a poor country. It is wary of any change that might erode that status and fuel demands for action to stimulate the global economy or concessions on trade and climate change. Imagine that, not wanting to be number one? China stocks drop most in 5 weeks on property concerns. China stocks fell the most in 5 weeks after valuations for the benchmark index climbed to the highest level in 17 months and on concern the government may introduce measures to curb property prices in March. The Shanghai Composite Index fell 1.6% to 2,382.91 at the close, the biggest loss since January 11 and the worst two-day start to the Lunar New Year since 2007. The CSI 300 Index retreated 1.9% to 2,685.61. The Hang Seng China Enterprises Index slumped 1.4%. There's been speculation that there will be more property tightening as home prices have not fallen. The Chinese housing bubble continues. China is boosting its presence in resource-rich Antarctica. China is boosting its presence in Antarctica, with an eye on the icy continent's vast untapped resources, even though it could take 35 years to start exploiting them. China has doubled its spending on Antarctic research in the past decade, although, at about $55 million in 2012, its effort is still much smaller than the U.S. Antarctic program, almost $300 million on top of Department of Defense support. Antarctic treaty members, which include the U.S. and China, have agreed not to exploit Antarctic resources until 2048. Blockbuster growth in China's film industry. China has become the world's second largest film market and is predicted to be the largest, overtaking Hollywood, by the end of the decade. Chinese box office receipts grew a staggering 31% to about $2.75 billion last year. China has over 12,000 movie screens and it is adding more at a rate of 8 to 10 each day. China launches doping probe. China is promising an investigation into claims by a World Anti-Doping Agency official that the country is the source for an overwhelming majority of the raw materials used for banned performance-enhancing drugs. World Anti-Doping Agency Director General David Howman last week told Reuters that 99% of the raw materials used by criminal gangs around the world to make the drugs were emanating from China. The anti-doping chief in China on Tuesday said he was shocked by the comment and said he doubted those figures. State media said he is demanding more detailed information from World Anti-Doping Agency. India pushes for expanded banking links with China. India has called on China to expand banking links between the two countries and to enhance licensing procedures, in an effort to create a more conducive environment for companies on both sides of the border still grappling with financial barriers despite rapid growth in trade and mutual investments. ICBC is the only Chinese bank with a branch in India, although ICBC has expressed interest in opening a second branch in New Delhi and the Bank of China is considering opening a branch in Mumbai. Banks in both countries have expressed some frustration at the challenging licensing procedures on both sides of the border. That's the China Report for today. Zaijian.